Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hi everyone, LB here. Before we jump in, I just want to say that we had such an amazing conversation about this week's princess. In fact, we had such a great conversation that ended up being a very, very long conversation that this princess's episode has actually been split into two. So today we are diving into part 1, and next week you will hear part 2. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Multiverse. Today, we are talking about a Disney heroine who is often forgotten because she is not a Disney princess, and also because she is live action rather than animated. But today, we are talking about Giselle. And if me saying Giselle didn't ring any bells, it's Giselle from Enchanted. Yay! And I'm here. This is HB here with my co-host LB and a super special guest. So LB, introduce our guest.
Yay. I'm so excited. Because up until this point, we've had a lot of, well, not just HB's friends, but a lot of like internet friends. But today we have my in-person friend. I wanted to say real life, but internet friends are real friends. Someone I've known since middle school. Someone I've reconnected with over the last couple of years, and I'm so excited. This is my friend Emily. Say hello, Emily.
Oh, hello.
Emily is a first-generation woman of color, fellow lifelong Disney lover with degrees in philosophy and psychology. She's also an advocate for mental health, grief, and trauma awareness. She's cosplayed as numerous characters like Lilo from Lilo and Stitch, Melody from the Little Mermaid II, Return to the Sea. Thank you for putting the full title in there.
It's part of it. I can't just say 2.
That's so good. Also, yes, I have seen that outfit or that cosplay, and it's perfect. It is so it's so freaking good. Also, you can curse. I don't know why I censored myself there. As well as Boo from Monsters Inc. Audrey Ramirez from Atlantis. We just watched that. That was actually our last episode. HB just watched it for the very first time.
Yeah, I have never seen
my gosh. It's one of my favorites.
It's good. It's a good one. From Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Viserion, the white dragon from Game of Thrones. How does one cosplay as a dragon? You know, let me get through your bio first. And then 11 from Stranger Things. How does one cosplay as a dragon?
I literally had a dragon mask and I painted my eyes blue so that when I closed them it looked like their eyes. And I had wings that like moved when I like pulled the string.
That is sick as fuck. That's cool.
I wore it to the office and the gal who sat in front of the bathroom got a jump scare every time. It was great.
There's a freaking dragon in here. Oh, but it'd be really cool. Wait, who's Viserion? Who's I mean, obviously is it Daenerys' dragon?
It was the one that turned into a white dragon from the, well, you know, I forgot what they're called.
The Ice King guys. Oh, the White Walkers. But
yes, the White Walkers. I was like, he's not Ice King. That's the Adventure Time
Ice King. Gotcha. Okay. It's been so long since I've watched Game of Thrones. I was like, who? I know she had anyway, we're not here to talk about Game of Thrones. We are here to talk about Giselle. And one of the reasons why we have Emily on for this episode is because she watched Enchanted and Disenchanted very recently. So I thought it'd be really cool to get your take along with ours. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. So sometimes we like to start the episodes talking about like our personal experience with seeing the movie for the first time, or just like how the movie has influenced our lives or been a part of our lives. So the movie came out November 21st, 2007, which means we were, I know it's so old.
That's
Emily and I were in 7th grade then. we knew each other at this time. Like we were going to school together. How cute.
Yeah.
But having rewatched it very recently last night at 1 a.m. As an adult, I think I liked it more as a kid. So I am really interested to have this conversation because when Heather pitched Giselle, I was like, okay. She gave me Kita, so we're trading off, and we're gonna talk about Giselle. But I do remember really liking the animation to live action thing. I thought Giselle was just like a very sweet character, and we can talk more about like the naive aspect of her character and what I perceive to be a little bit of toxic positivity. But I am curious, Emily, what your thoughts, feels are having watched it as a kid and now as an adult.
Honestly, I don't think I watched it in theaters. And I don't know like my first time watching it, like how I felt. I remember really liking it though. I thought like I really liked the animation to live action as well. I thought they did a good job with like the casting and the costuming and like the animation matching them. I thought it was cool that it gave like glimpses around New York because they were like in Central Park and all around the city. So I thought that was really neat because I had never been. But I really enjoyed the music, I think, of it. I thought it was really fun and it was kind of whimsical. And it was nice to see that in a live action because we didn't really have a lot of live action princess things at that time. I know they're really prevalent now, but there weren't at the time. So it was really cool. Also, I'd seen Amy Adams in a bunch of other things, but it was cool to see her as a princess as well. Seeing it as an adult, it definitely brought up like nostalgia feels. I still enjoyed it. And the reason I rewatched it recently is because I wanted to have context for watching Disenchanted for the first time, which I liked a whole lot less than Enchanted. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was still a good watch. But yes, definitely the toxic positivity and still like overtly too sweet, you know? Like it makes me question things, you know. Like if it's a facade and you know how much is really going on, and definitely with like the Nia Nia
For the Rapunzel episode, I was struggling. The naivete.
Naivete. Okay, adding too many syllables. But yeah, just being so naive. But I think also that has to do with like the cultural expectation of women and girls, especially as they're like preparing to become princesses or figuring out like what it means to be a woman and not getting a lot of information until things are happening to them already and it's too late. So I don't know. Overall, still enjoyed it, but many thoughts.
That's a good point. I actually never really thought of that. I guess Giselle does kind of represent someone who is now figuring out adulting and the real world as an adult, because I actually can very much relate to that of like kind of growing up in a bubble and then having the bubble burst and realizing the real world is simultaneously scarier and not as bad as we were told. Because yeah, something Emily and I talk a lot about is deconstructing our Christianity. We both grew up in very like religious spaces. So see, this is why I love these conversations, because I hadn't thought of that. But before we jump super far into that, Heather, what about you? When was your first time watching it, or was it recent?
So I never saw it as a kid because this came out when I was 18. I'm a wee bit older than y'all. This came out when I was 18. I don't know that I saw it in theaters, but I might have because I was working at a movie theater at the time. So there's a possibility that I did. I know that I saw it before I moved to New York. I've been in New York for 11 years. I moved here in 2012. So a few years after the movie came out. I know that I saw it before the movie came out, like maybe in college at some point. And I remember really liking it. I love James Marsden. He's just like such a like fun, silly guy. I love Amy Adams. So like I think that I liked it and had seen it just as like a thing. But I remember after I moved to New York, I watched it with a kid I was babysitting. And it was probably like 2013, like a year after I had been here. So I had kind of established a life here and was really familiar with it. And I remember thinking it was really cool to rewatch after having moved to New York, because I actually like knew all the places that they were, because they spend a lot of time in Columbus Circle and in that area of Central Park that's near Columbus Circle. And that was an area that I also spent a lot of time in when I first moved here. The first family that I nannied for was in Columbus Circle. So like the Time Warner Center that they show, in which is the one where Giselle sees the statue and she's like, she's beautiful. Like that is a place where I spent a lot of time with the kids I was babysitting. And that specific area of Central Park, there was like a playground that I would take the kids to there. So I just thought like the next watch that I did after I had moved to New York felt really special and cool, because I was like, I know all these places now. So that was really fun and really cool. But I never really took much away from the movie besides really enjoying the thought of like someone who is fictional from a fairy tale land coming to the real world and seeing like how hard and how cruel it could be, but then it's not actually as hard and as cruel as everyone who's here thinks it is. And like by her presence, simply by her presence, like she brings the best out in the people around her, and that kind of thing I kind of took out of it. What's really cool about watching it just this morning before recording is that yesterday I saw the Barbie movie again, for the third time, because I am a little obsessed. And also
Great
because
thing
like
to be obsessed with.
yeah, I just like have this, I have a hyperfixation and I'm going with it and it's fine. But I saw the Barbie movie again yesterday, and then rewatching this today, there are a lot of similarities that I picked up on sort of like, you know, Giselle comes from the different world, Barbie comes from Barbie land, comes into the real world and discovers all these things. And, you know, Barbie decides to stay, spoiler alert, but this comes out long enough away that you should have seen Barbie by now.
Should have seen it.
But like Barbie decides to stay in the real world because she thinks that like the pain and the emotions that come with being a human are worth it. And I think it's like similar to why Giselle decides to stay. But the big difference, the big difference is that Barbie doesn't stay because of love and Giselle stays because of love. And so I do think that that's the big difference between the two, is that like Barbie is sort of like a big feminist statement of like what it's like to live and exist under patriarchy and how hard it is for women to do that without finding like these specific milestones part of their life, like a husband, a specific body, a specific career, like that kind of thing. Whereas the focus of Enchanted really was just like to find true love. So
yeah, her identity is really centered around what man she's with. Versus like Barbie was like, oh, Ken is just a friend.
Yeah, like everybody can be their own complete person without a significant other. Like Ken's just Ken and she's Barbie. Well, she's everything. But
she's everything. But yeah, I think like, you know, especially with the way that Enchanted ends, with both, so like to rewind for people who don't know, it's Prince Edward, who's played by James Marsden, comes to find her and rescue her from the real world. But she, in the meantime, has fallen in love with Robert, who is played by Patrick Dempsey. And like, of course, you would fall in love with Robert, right? Like what?
He's anyway.
But she in the meantime falls in love with him, and once Edward finds her, she sort of realizes like, oh, I'm not acting like a princess anymore. I'm not singing. My heart isn't in this anymore. I've kind of felt a little bit more realism about everything. And then in the meantime, Robert has a partner named Nancy, who he's planning on proposing to, played by Idina Menzel. And so at the very, very end, they're at this ball together. And that's when all the stuff happens where Giselle eats the poison apple and she passes out. And then Edward, her prince, kisses her and nothing happens. Like true love's kiss doesn't save her. And then Nancy, Robert's partner is sort of like, go ahead, kiss her, it's okay. And then Patrick Dempsey kisses Giselle, Amy Adams, and it works and she comes back to life. And then so they pair off, obviously, to have their happily ever after, but it doesn't end there. Also, Nancy ends up going back to is it Andalasia? Is that so it's almost like this, like they had to give both women a man in the end to make it a happy ending or something. Like, you know, it's like they tied it up in this really pretty neat little bow, which I think, like, to make a feel good movie makes sense, to sort of be like, nobody lost in the end. Like, you know, I think it would have been very sad if Nancy ended up alone at the end. Like, that would have been really sad. But I just think it's an interesting and very different ending to a movie that was made in 2023, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another, I think, important, like, plot point too is that Robert has a daughter that he is, I guess, raising by himself. And so another, like, kind of through line of the movie is her wanting a mom. And at the beginning, Robert thinking that Nancy could be a mother figure, although he's very explicit that, like, she won't ever, you know, she won't try to be your mom. And then because the little girl is so enamored with fairy tale, she's like, yeah, she'll be my stepmom. And obviously in fairy tales, stepmothers have a reputation for being cruel and evil and just not nice. So it's interesting that she has, like, trepidations about Nancy, but then Giselle enters the picture. And I think it's because Giselle believes in she is a fairy tale, but she, like, validates Morgan's love of fairy tales in a way that Robert never could, or that Nancy maybe hadn't ever either. And I think that's why they bonded too. And then Giselle definitely gives in to, like, Morgan's childhood wonder and childlike joy and just, like, all of that. So they kind of click better. And I think that's also, like, another factor as to why Robert ends up falling in love with Giselle also, is because he is really looking out for Morgan, which I thought was just really cute.
Yeah. And specifically, like, I mean, Robert was giving, I think it was Morgan's birthday was coming up or something, and he had gotten her a book specifically on, like, women in different careers or empowering through history. And he was just trying to keep her grounded in the real life and, like, set her expectations properly, but wasn't letting her play, which is so important in childhood.
Right.
He wasn't giving her that freedom to be creative, to be imaginative, because and I think what had happened was Morgan's mom had left them. They don't actually say why, but he just was very into, like, the realism of, like, life is hard and I want to prepare you for it, which is still a good thing to do. But there has to be freedom for both play and, like, you know, raising your daughter.
Right. And that's something HB and I have talked about too on a different episode, I think, is, like, there's nothing wrong with preparing a child for adulthood. I think the issue comes when you're expecting a child to behave like an adult, and that's just,
like, the adultification when they're too young.
Right. It's just not age appropriate to expect them to understand all of these really like the complexities of life when they don't even really understand, like, their own emotions, their own feelings, their own themselves, you know? But
yeah, and she had even asked for a fairy tale book for her birthday, and he was like, it's not the fairy tale book you asked for, but look at all these amazing women, you know?
Right. And Robert is an interesting character because he's so realistic, but I think it's also, like, tinged with a lot of pessimism because of his own, like, heartbreak for the mom leaving. But also, is he, like, a divorce lawyer?
Yeah.
So I think his perspective of, like, love and life is already just, like,
Bleak.
what is it, like? yeah, it's very bleak because, like, his everyday is seeing people who are separating or divorcing. Also, LOL, I laughed so hard when Giselle starts crying that these people are breaking up, And well, first of all, she starts with like, your hair is so beautiful, and touches the
Oh
black
my
lady's
God.
hair.
Yeah.
And I remember cringing so hard. I was like, no, 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 no. We don't do that anymore. I mean, you shouldn't ever, but definitely not now. But of
Did
course,
not
this was
age
made in
well.
2007. Yeah, it did not age well. But she starts crying that this couple is breaking up. And she's like, but she has like a spark, like, look at this sparkle in her eye. That's why you fell in love with her, right? And blah, 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 blah. And then fast forward a couple scenes and they're like, never mind, we don't want to get a divorce because yeah, like I remember now why I fell in love with her. And I'm like, y'all racked up so many legal fees just to get over it. Like, what? I thought that was really funny. But again, I think a testament to how um Giselle's innate just like joy and how she's not afraid to express her feelings in that way can have like a really big impact, which I thought was in some ways kind of sweet, but also again, now being an adult and being a little bit more realistic, I'm just like, those damn legal fees, something you guys are gonna have to keep paying off for a while, and then maybe who knows, that'll lead to like more resentment, and then you'll be back in a couple years. Anyway,
Financial stressors are one of the biggest things.
yeah. So anyway, I think Robert is just like an interesting character. His development from where we see him at the beginning of the movie, where he's just always saying no. He's saying no to Morgan, saying no to Giselle. Just his life is a big no. And then by the end, where he's like happy and playful and like really devoting more time to his family, I think is very interesting and sweet.
Yeah. I think he was trying to protect Morgan, but I think he also was really protective of himself too. Like, it was self-preservation to not open himself up to more harm, I think, too.
Yeah, which is interesting because he's so like pragmatic and practical about him and Nancy's relationship and like proposing or whatever, because he's like, well, we know each other and we get all of the hard stuff out of the way or whatever. But then I thought it was really funny that when Nancy finds Giselle in a towel on top of Robert, and that obviously raises a lot of questions. Also, like, so surprising for a kids movie. Like, that would not, I don't know, that's just that I thought that was really it was very rom-commy, which makes sense given that like Amy Adams's big rise to fame was like doing a lot of or just the one rom-com.
She did do rom-com.
Oh, anyway, and then to make up for it, Robert, well, with Giselle's help, sends Nancy flowers delivered by doves. And Nancy's like, what has gotten into you? Like, you're not acting like yourself. And she like super loves it. And I think that's like, that was my first clue as to like, I don't know, like, you can already see that, yeah, they like make it work, I think, on a very practical level, but like the romantic stuff wasn't ever really there. That's what I think. Anyway, but we're not here to talk about, I mean, we are here to talk about Robert and Nancy, but the focus is mainly on Giselle. And so my question for you, Emily, is what do you like about the character? Like, what do you find empowering about Giselle?
I mean, I think you've already mentioned a few of the things, like her ability to still have childlike wonder and fully be able to express herself, because she doesn't have those like trepidations, the word you used earlier, of like the real world. She doesn't know what to be afraid of. Like, she's just very trusting, and thinks that everything's going to work out for her good. And so she just is willing to put herself in all of these potentially like risky situations, literally like on a billboard, like knocking on a castle door. You know, like, my first thought was like, oh my God, she's going to fall and she's going to get hurt. And like, she has no
my
insurance.
first thought was, we've seen a lot of these kinds of people in San Francisco.
Yep. Yeah. But I just appreciate that, just 100% genuine. There was no like need to put on a face. There was no like fake niceties. Like, she genuinely just like found something good in everyone, which I think is really hard to do if you've been burned too many times, like Robert and Nancy had been, or like you're really risk averse. And she just was like, I have nothing to lose, and so I have everything to gain, and all these people do as well. So I really did appreciate that about her character. And that, I mean, so we were talking about like adultification of children too young. But I think even though she was like kind of Morgan's playmate in a lot of ways, she also just listened to Morgan and paid attention to what Morgan said she
Yeah.
wanted, and like didn't treat her like an adult, but treated her like a human with her own wants and needs and desires, and like spoke into that
Yeah.
and was a friend to her, which and it was just really wholesome. So I appreciated
Yeah.
that. And that she just, without even trying, was like teaching Robert how to be more open and willing to accept care and like affection, and being able to give it as well freely, even to Nancy when she was trying to help coach him. So there are aspects I really do appreciate of her character. I won't go into other things until later, but
Okay.
we'll stick with
No,
positive things for now.
yeah, no, I agree with all of that. What about you, Heather? Anything similar, different?
Very similar. I think that like how genuine she is, even though her genuine personality comes from like naivete, I think that she um is not yeah, I just said it.
No, we both
In
She's
my
like
head, it sounded like that, but my mouth wasn't doing that. And then I was like, naivete. Like I couldn't say it normal. Sorry.
yeah, I mean it doesn't yeah, it sounds like a fancy word. But I do think that like where that comes from, it comes from like a genuine place because that's all that she knows. And so that makes her a very genuine and very kind-hearted person. She's kind to everyone, like homeless people, random people in Central Park, like and so, you know, as someone who has lived in New York for 11 years, it is not easy to be kind because because the city is rough. This is a rough, I mean, it's rough to live anywhere, right? Like the world is a rough place. But like I think one of the reasons that it was set in New York, like specifically, I think Susan Sarandon's character, the evil queen, says something like to a place where there are no happily ever afters. I think she meant the real world, but like also just specifically New York. Like because it's just like it's such a like hustle and bustle city, like the city that never sleeps. And there's that like, you know, the
Concrete jungle.
yeah, very there's just a lot of stereotypes about like what it means to be a New Yorker and the fact that like people are not nice here and that kind of thing. So I think there was this very specific reason that they chose New York for the setting of it as well. Because of that stereotype that New York carries, and that it is hard to be nice here because people think that like there's always another shoe that's going to drop if you're being nice to someone here, or like it's yeah, it's you kind of learn living in New York to stay in your own lane. You know, like
Mm.
people here, we don't really like smile at each other on the street. We don't really, you know, like I I think I've talked about this before and I can't remember the wording, but it's like New Yorkers are nice but not kind, or kind but not nice. It's like one of those. And it's
Mhm.
like we will hold the door open for you, but you know, you'll get so much as a nod or a it's there's not going to be like a big like, you know, thank you so much for holding the door open for me, right? And like we will, you know, help someone carry their stroller up the stairs, but it's not necessarily because we are nice. It's because it's faster to help them than for them to do it by themselves, you know, like that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that like people don't do it out of the kindness of their own hearts to like help someone. But you are just kind of taught, like when you see a homeless person, to keep your head down and ignore them, or to say like, sorry, I don't have like, or to acknowledge them at least, but then keep going because like they are human beings too. Um, so I do think that like eh, there are things about New York specifically that make you very hard. And I have personally changed from living here. Like I grew up in the Midwest and I used to be just so uh I was very much like say good morning to everyone. And when my mom came here to visit, she was like trying to talk to strangers on the subway. Like, you know, I was like,
No.
we don't do that. We don't leave people alone. Like, so anyway, all of that to say that I think it's especially funny to see a character existing here and just kind of willingly giving out kindness because she doesn't know any better, which just
Yeah.
like sounds kind of pessimistic, right? To be like, you don't know better than to like ignore a person who is going through like a really hard time. You know, it's like it's just this wild thing. But anyway, in the ways in which Robert is incredibly pessimistic, it is balanced by Giselle's optimism, but the optimism is not always necessarily warranted, which I think is something that we want to dive a little deeper in and talk about. But one thing that I do like about them and their relationship at the very least is that they helped each other grow and change, in terms of like leveling each other out in their optimism and pessimism. Like they came to a point where they were able to see the other person's perspective. And he kind of grounded her a little bit in reality while she helped him see that life isn't as, dreary and bleak as he sees it. So I do like that about them as well.
I agree. I do think that there were a lot of instances where I was like, this feels like toxic positivity, mainly because she's just like just this outpouring of optimism, but I think also coming from a fairy tale where the stereotypical princess is just like so happy all the time and nothing ever bothers me and I'm so pretty, and then she comes to the real world and real world and she's experiencing quote unquote negative emotions or bad emotions like sadness and anger, and she's not really sure what they are. Like when she experiences anger for the first time, which I thought was, Amy Adams is such a good actor in this. Like, first of all, she plays naive really well, and then when she's like angry and she's yelling at Patrick Dempsey, yeah, and then she's yelling, but she's like, oh my god, I'm angry, and she's like laughing, she's like, but I'm so angry, and she like punches him,
and he's like, are you good?
She's like having a moment, and he's like, okay. But I think again, that's also like, what am I trying to say here? Jesus Christ. I think there were a couple thoughts that just came to my mind. The first being like, that's kind of like what kids do, like when they're experiencing an intense emotion for the first time and they can't name it yet. So they just kind of externalize it. She punches him. Kids will lash out and, process it in their own way. And then, people are like, use your words. I'm like, well, if they haven't been taught the words to use yet, they can't use their words. They can't explain like, I'm feeling this in, how like therapists sometimes will be like, where do you feel that in your body? Like you can't ask a child to do that. And very similarly, like Giselle's just like, she was given the word and now she can name it. And then there was another instance where I was like, I don't know, this just feels like, oh, it could have been when like she and Robert are talking about love and the real world and how it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and she's like, but it is and it can be. And I think that, even though it was like, it felt very toxic positivity to me, I think it, by the end of the movie, Robert does see that like there can be sunshine and rainbows. It doesn't mean that it's always sunshine and rainbows, and that's a lesson that Giselle comes to too, is like real life isn't always happy, but that doesn't mean there can't be happiness, which I think is a very true lesson. Like speaking of happily ever afters, like that's a huge theme I think of the movie, is like love and finding your happily ever after. And I do think it's funny that she comes to the real world and she's in New York, where it's a place where there are no happy ever afters, which I don't think is completely false, but I think it's more so that there isn't one fixed goal or ending. You know what I mean? Like for in Andalasia, for Giselle, it's like she gets married and that's it. Like she becomes a princess. That's her happily ever after. But there's like more life to that. Like in the real world, we know like even if you do, I don't know, like a lot of people think I'll be happy when I get the job, I'll be happy when I get the marriage, I'll be happy when. But I think we also forget that when we meet that milestone, you still have to do things to maintain that, and you still have to keep working toward that. So even though I don't necessarily love the ending, I do think in their own kind of way they do kind of get their happily ever afters, and I like that we have a sequel that shows that they work at maintaining the happiness anyway.
Well, that's the thing about fairy tales, is like they always just like get married and then there's nothing after. But I feel like Disenchanted was like, and then there was an after, and it wasn't all perfect. But Yeah, I mean, like you said, that's her end goal, just get married. And I think to your point about, there can be sunshine and rainbows and like roses and stuff. Like there, I mean, and you were talking about like her animal friends and sleeping in a meadow. I mean, like she couldn't sleep outside. When a homeless man stole her tiara, she was like, that wasn't very nice. Like she'd never experienced that before. When she got pushed into the well by the evil queen and the like witch, she was like, oh, I must have tripped, or I must have fell, or I must have leaned too far. Like she just was still taking that on herself instead of actually like putting it where, blame should have been placed in those instances.
Yeah.
And when you talk about her animal friends, like she, had animal friends in New York, and it was like cockroaches and rats. Like it and she
How
still was like,
realistic.
but she still was like, okay, we're gonna make this work and it's gonna be fine. Or like she literally was in her wedding dress and had nothing to wear, and she's like, yeah, I'm gonna use these curtains, which, as a person who is an adult and owns things, like I'd be pissed off and be like, that's for my curtains. Like, what did you do?
My
Yeah.
curtains.
But like she was just making the best out of bad situations, and it's really hard to do when life's already beaten you down, and life hadn't beaten her down yet. So she still had that like hopefulness, which I think was more to the point of like why New York is like there's just like not a lot of hope because life has beaten you down a lot there. And like I
Yeah.
said at the beginning, I was like, when I first thought I hadn't been to New York, I've since been to New York. I also feel like San Francisco has a lot of those like similar, like stay in your lane, keep to yourself, don't talk to people when you're on BART, ignore homeless people or people who are, maybe have some mental stuff happening while they're on the street and
Yeah.
causing a ruckus. So there's that similar vein of like, I think it's just like big cities. That's a thing that happens because there's too many different lives, too many different like daily passings with these kinds of people.
I want to go back to something Marissa was saying, because I liked what you were saying about Giselle. Like when she's in Andalasia, like that fantasy world, she does only have one end goal, and happily ever after looks very much like becoming a princess. But in New York or in any, in the real world, your happily ever after can look like anything, right? And I think that is a really important point to make, that like I myself struggle with sometimes, is like I'm not where I thought I would be, but I've also built the exact life that I want to have right now. And like, sure, it would be easier maybe if I had a committed partner, or sure, it would be easier if I had quote unquote true love, or like whatever it is that like you think will fix whatever's going on in your life, right?
Yeah.
But like, but there is effort that goes into maintaining happily ever after, as we talked about. And like, that can look like working towards your goals in a successful career. It can look like whatever you want it to look like. And I think that a good example would be in a big city like New York. One of the reasons that it's hard to have that perceived quote unquote happily ever after is because a lot of people are here working on their own individual dreams. And sometimes there is not a lot of room for romantic relationships in that. And I'm not saying that, people in New York don't find love, because we obviously do. And I have, like there's lots of evidence of that around me. So I'm not going to
There
say
are
that it
lots of
doesn't happen.
movies that would show that people do.
But what I'm trying to say really is just that like, I think it's places where people are focused on their own individual dreams that don't necessarily include getting married, having kids, all of that. It's harder for that to be a realistic happily ever after, because that's not what people are focusing on. That's not our end goal for the most part in places like this. And sometimes it can be both, or it can be all of it. You could be looking for all of it. I'm just saying that like it's another reason that like it's funny that it was set here is because that's not necessarily everyone's goal here. But it also could be. I'm not saying that's not either. It's like there's like room for all of it. But happily ever after here in New York is also like working towards whatever goal you have that is not related to that romantic relationship in the end as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think on that same vein, your happily ever after can like change. Because I think, like we talked about, people will say, you know, I'll be happy when X, Y, and Z happens, whatever. And I think in this movie, we see Giselle, her happily ever after, her goal is true love with the prince. I don't know if like she intended to become a princess, but I think it was mainly around, no, she does say prince, right? In her song, a prince to
Yep.
kiss or something.
Yep.
So anyway, she does have dreams and goals of becoming a princess and falling in love and living in the castle and blah 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 blah. And that changes, and I think that's like another really important message or takeaway from this movie is that your goals can change, or that you can still reach the goal even if it doesn't look exactly the way you pictured, or the path wasn't exactly what you thought it would be. And I think like Pixar movies do a really good job of encapsulating that. You know, I'm thinking of like Ratatouille. While Gusto's shuts
Yeah.
down, he still opens his restaurant. Or like Monsters University. We know that in Monsters Inc. they end up being like really good scares, but they start in the mail room, or they like get kicked out of college and then they start in the mail room, you know? So like I think whatever your goal is, I think it's really important to have that marker that you're working toward, but not letting the not being so rigid with the process and expectations. And like I think one of you mentioned, I don't remember who, adapting to situations. I think Giselle does a really good job. I think Emily, you said she makes like she she makes the most out of quote unquote bad situations. I don't know, that's just like a really important thing to keep in mind as we are going through this thing called life, that we can't always control the situations that we are going to have to deal with, but trusting that we can make the most. And when I say make the most, that doesn't mean like it's going to be happy. It's just taking it as it comes and doing what you need to do to surviving it through it, I think is really important.
Yeah. I have two thoughts on your like goal thing, and
Go
they're
for it.
different.
Okay.
Okay.
Go for it. I love it.
So one, okay, her wanting to be a princess, that being the expectation of little girls to everyone want to be a princess is crazy. Like
Yeah.
it's audacious because you have a whole kingdom and like everyone expects to be chosen and everybody expects to be a princess. And I know that's what makes it so special when they are chosen, but also that's so unrealistic for real little girls. For everybody to be like, I'm going to be a princess, I'm going to marry a prince, you know, or have their Prince Charming in one form or another is crazy because there's only so many princes. And also that says a lot about trying to escape poverty. I don't know. And upper class, but you know, different conversation. But like that's like one thought kind of in a bucket. The other thought is that you're saying, you know, goals can change, but also you can reach your goal and then be like, well, I don't know what's next, you know, because I think at one point, Robert does ask her, like, so you're just marrying this guy you met yesterday? Like, you don't go on dates, you don't know anything about each other. And also, like, what comes next? And she's like, I don't know, he's gonna save me, he's gonna save me, he's gonna save me. And it's just like your goals can change, yes, but you also can reach a goal and then not know what to do with it. I know people who have worked really hard in their education field to reach a certain career, and then once they get there they're like, well, this isn't what I expected it to be, or I've been working for so long and so hard to get here, and now I don't know what to do with it because it's not all my hopes and dreams, and now I feel stuck. And the reality of that is like no career is ever going to fill all of your needs, or be perfect. There's going to be things you like and don't like, but like you can reach a goal and then have to set a new goal. And I think that's part of the thing with like we as a society have a lot of discontentment in whatever stage we're currently in because we're looking forward to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Because once you reach the thing, then you're like, well, I need another one. I need something to keep me going. I need something to make me look towards the future and give me hope and promise and excitement, you know? And I think a lot can be said about that as well. Sorry, I'm just opening new cans of worms, but like they're, I think they're all relevant. And I feel like I came up with a third one while talking and I lost it, but maybe it'll come back. I don't know.
I have a lot to say about what you just said too. And I think like the way that we were referring to goals earlier with that like happily ever after feeling, right? Like yeah, just to keep in mind that that's like where we are really just meaning like what are your goals that you're working towards, and that goals do not always necessarily feel good when you complete them or when you reach them, or they're not always what you like. If it's something that you always thought you wanted and you got there and it didn't feel right or it didn't feel good, kind of like how when the prince finally came for Giselle and she had changed, I think it says a lot about the process of whatever it is that you're going through as well, with like the process of reaching a goal. There are times when you set an arbitrary goal, like I'm going to be a princess, right? Like
Mhm.
that's an arbitrary goal. For me as a fitness professional and a fitness coach, a lot of people set the arbitrary goal of a specific weight on the scale, a specific number on the scale, right? A lot of times these goals are unrealistic, right? The goal of being a princess is just generally an unrealistic goal, right? The goal of a specific weight on the scale is generally an unrealistic goal, depending on what number you've put there or whatever. But oftentimes the things that you go through to get you there also have an effect on how you feel once you get there. So like if we go with the scale as an example, if you spent a lot of time depriving yourself of certain foods and you are not happy and you're beating yourself up at the gym, when you reach that goal of the scale, there is a feeling of almost emptiness inside when you reach it. And so like one thing that I think is a positive takeaway from the way in which Giselle changed when she met her goal of the prince is that she realized that that goal didn't serve her. Um, and so I think that's one thing that we can take away from the process of things too, is like, you know, the process of her reaching her goal was that she got a lot of help from someone who helped her out of the unrealistic mindset um of becoming a princess, right? And grounded her a little more in realism. And like when it comes to a certain number on the scale, maybe you're getting help from a coach that's sort of like grounding you a little more in like, you know, well, you still need to eat and you still need to enjoy
Mhm.
your life and you still need
Yeah.
to do all of these things. And so I think that that is like a positive example of like sometimes your goals don't serve you, or the arbitrary goals that you set don't always serve you, unrealistic, arbitrary. But then on the flip side, there's also something to be said about our kind of toxic hustle culture where you're always going to have to strive and reach for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So you know, I think there is a lot to be said about finding happiness in every moment of every day. Um, I don't know if y'all have heard of the TikTok trend like lucky girl syndrome or whatever. Um, I personally don't love the phrasing, but something that has brought me a lot of joy, essentially what the trend is like saying something that went really well for you or made you happy or felt really good about your day at the end of each day. Because what that does is when you're genuinely thinking about all the ways in which you are lucky and things are going well for you, more good things come and more good things happen. And I think that living a life where you lead with that sort of mindset generally does tend to bring out um more happiness in the moment, and then in every given day you're looking for something to be happy about rather than your goal bringing you happiness.
Right.
I have
Yeah.
not heard of that TikTok trend. However, I've heard of similar things where it's like
Mhm.
um it's a gratitude practice and savoring, you know, moments in life. I personally do this thing called the Happiness Project. where it's a 1-sentence journal, 5-year record, and it's literally just pages. You just put the date in and you write 1 sentence, just 1 sentence about the day, something that was good, which is way easier than journaling for me right now. And it's just, it could be the simplest thing. And I think it's the same mindset of like finding something good. And not necessarily that it means more good things are going to happen to you, but you're more appreciative of the good, or you're
Like you
looking for the
notice.
good.
Yeah, you just notice more good things. Because I think it's kind of like when you have a bad day, you overslept your alarm, your toast is burnt, your coffee's not good, whatever. And then it just kind
Barbie.
of like snow. Yeah, we also saw that movie very recently. And then you just like notice all of the quote unquote not good things happening, right? Like someone cuts you off on the freeway, you're late to work, your boss is in a grumpy mood, you're in a grumpy mood. And then what I don't love about the phrasing of lucky girl, or like even what I just said, is the thought that when you're in that mindset, you're just attracting the bad things. It's not so much about attracting them, and that's not what I'm saying, but it is just like you start then to notice those things. Exactly. Because like maybe, I don't know, this is like kind of jumping, but maybe you were late because you avoided like something happening on the freeway, or an encounter with something that could have hurt you or harmed you, or something. So anyway, all that to say, I do have mixed feelings about like gratitude, things like that, because sometimes it does veer into like toxic positivity or invalidation. I think sometimes as society tends to do this, we're like, okay, but it could be like your life could be worse. You know, there are people who are suffering so much more than you. You have nothing to be upset about. And it's like super triggering for me when I hear that, because my mom used to say that all the time, where like when she found out I was going to therapy and taking antidepressants, she was like, what do you have to be depressed about? And I was like, you literally make me want to not be here. And she's like, well, you know, you're just an entitled millennial. You have a roof over your head. You have food, which she would withhold all the time. And like all of these things. And then I remember even being as a kid and like trying to talk to people about what was happening, because I had like no adults to talk to. But my friends would be like, yeah, my mom's a bitch too. And I'm like, okay, but it's not just like her being a bitch. It's like, it's so much more than that. When we're talking about gratitude and we're talking about like savoring the moment, it's not so much just like only seeing those things, but again, like we talk about almost every episode, it really is just like the both. And like the good things don't have to negate the bad things that happen, and the bad things don't have to negate the good things that happen. And also sometimes it's okay to be in a place where we can't savor the good things. Especially, I think we talk about mental health and trauma on this podcast sometimes. I mean, not sometimes, like we are called Mental Health Multiverse, but anyway, all of that to say, it's okay if you are in a place where you can't always jump to the good thing first or see the positive spin in things. That doesn't mean you're failing in some kind of way. That doesn't mean you're not healed enough. It doesn't mean that like you're like, it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It could just mean right now you have to process the quote unquote bad thing, or you just have to like find the step toward the good thing, if that makes sense. Like find what you can believe, and accept that may be empowering or good or helpful in some kind of way, and then work toward this now feels better or something.
Yeah. Well, and I think savoring moments and practicing gratitude doesn't mean that you have to make something bad good. I mean, at least for me personally, I'm just like, no, I treated myself to something good today. Like I ate something I enjoyed, or like I had a really sweet moment with my dogs, or I took a minute and I stepped outside and I took a deep breath and I noticed the flowers. Like it doesn't even have to be turning bad things or negative things into positives. It could just be like there is still good, even if they're in these small moments. And it doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't have to be, I don't know.
It doesn't have to be so extreme as turning a bad thing into a good thing. It could just be acknowledging both, that like the good can exist with the bad, and they don't have to like compete for a seat at the table. That like But
and it can be something that simple. Like it can be something really small. And if that's like something that gets you through the day and into the next one, then like that might be all it takes. But
yeah,
as you're saying, you're not failing as a human or you're not doing something wrong if you can't find that either, because sometimes it's just not there.
yeah. And I think Giselle hits that point at some point in the movie where she's like, I can't put my fairy tale positive spin on this and I don't know what to do. And it's okay. Like, it's just okay to not know sometimes. It's okay to like not have gratitude be the first thing, or it's okay to just kind of like just be. I think that's what I'm trying to say is like it's okay to just experience like no feelings, experience everything in between, because like it all belongs. And I think especially in talking about mental health, like your body knows when it's ready to address the next thing, you know? Just be kinder with yourself. Take your time. It's okay. It's okay if you feel more Robert than Giselle. Um and I think again that's just like the black and white thinking of where we perceive, because it's easier for our brains to do this, right? It's just easier for the human brain to perceive opposites rather than like the gray area and the nuance of things. But I think there can be a lot of peace and a lot of, even though it feels uncomfortable, there is a lot of comfort in knowing that like just these things can exist at the same time, and that's what makes us multifaceted human beings. And as we discover with Giselle and with Barbie, it's one of the things that makes life beautiful for these fantastical creatures, because it's not all one thing, it's a bunch of different things that you do get to experience, which can be kind of beautiful. So
Yeah.
thanks for listening to part 1 of Giselle's episode. Join us next week for part 2, where we talk about even more amazing stuff like dissociation and healing and what it means to integrate the things that we are consuming in regards to self-help and personal development content. So stay tuned. See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebit_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.